So now that we have covered the very basics of testing a component, the last thing that I want to leave you with is how do you handle a component that has a dependency? Thankfully, Angular works on a concept of dependency injection. And so hopefully at this point, this is nothing new, but I have a component that has a dependency that calls a service, that calls a server, that mutates a database or something. You typically do not want to use real services in your component test. It's really, really important that when you are writing a test, you are only testing the thing that is under test. So meaning, if I am testing this app component and I look at this, I see that I also have the auth service that's being injected in. And right now it's currently not doing anything, and our tests are not forcing this auth service to do anything. But let's say we were testing logout and it actually hit a real database. Well, that would be bad. And more importantly is that if it returned some kind of a result, we wouldn't want to test the correctness of that result inside of the component test. When we look at a method like this, the question is, what does logout do? Well, when you call logout, it calls logout on the auth service. That's what you need to be able to test. You do not need to be able to test, for instance, the temptation might be that if I click into auth service here, you'll notice that when somebody calls logout, that it sets a property to locally on this class to false. And so we're keeping track of within the stream, is this authenticated? Well, it would be a misstep that when we call this within our app component spec to test the properties on the auth service, like we expect that auth service dot is authenticated to be false. The reason being is because that test or that assertion belongs in the auth service test. And so what we need is the ability to segment and isolate our component and provide something that looks and feels like a real dependency, but in fact is not. And so this is where we can leverage the dependency injection system to use mocks and by extension spies. And so what I want to do is I want to override the auth service and use something else in its place. So not too hard. The first thing that I recommend when starting out on this is this right here. I will just simply create a mock object. So in this case, we're going to call it mock auth service. And what I'm going to do here is I know that we are calling logout. And I'm going to give it a property of nope or no op, and I'll define this up here. And this is just something that I've picked up from doing just this over and over and over, is a lot of times I will create an empty function. It's called no op or no operation. It doesn't do anything. I just need an empty function to exist in its place. So now what I can do is take this mock auth service and I can use this in place of the real service. So what I need to do as well is create a reference to the auth service, and then within the testbed configuration, I am going to update this to have a providers array, and I'm going to add in a new object. And so from here, we're going to provide auth service And instead of using the auth service, we're going to go use value, and we're going to go mock auth service. So what we're saying is I want to provide the auth service, but in its place, I want to use value. You can use a couple different things here. Use class, I think even use object. There's a few ways to do this, but typically I just will use an object, and therefore I can use value. So now we have essentially overridden the auth service with our mock auth service. Now what I want to do is I want to get a reference to this. So service equals testbed inject auth service. This the particular semantics around this is a little funny to me because I feel like you would be injecting something into the testbed, but what this does is actually return whatever instance of the auth service that it has, which in this case will be our mock auth service. So semantics, or the API, the way that they define that seems a little funny to me, but nonetheless, it is what it is. And so from here, we are going to write one more test to illustrate how to take our mock service, and then we're going to spy on it. So from here, it should properly delegate logout responsibility. And so when we do this, what we want is not to test that we were even logged out. We just want to test or verify that the component itself has properly delegated. So we're going to use spy on, and this is creates a Jasmine spy, and we're going to spy on the service, and we're going to specifically spy on the logout method. And from here, we're going to go end, and you'll notice you have a number of options here: call fake, call through, return value. There's a lot of things we can do here. In this case, I am just going to call through. There we go. And so you can create a spy, and if you need, or if the component or whatever you're testing needs for this to complete, or there's some kind of expected flow, and you don't allow the spy to call through, once it hits this, it will stop. And so by doing spy on and call through, it spies on that method, but then it allows it to execute normally. And then from here, so real quick, arrange. Let's go ahead and act. So what we want to do is we want to call component logout, and then we're going to assert. So from here, we would expect that services, or service rather, logout, what do we expect? Well, that it should have been called. All right, we'll save this, and let's hop into our test here, and let's see what happened. Apparently, it's looking for something and it doesn't exist. So the reason why I allowed this to happen is because I wanted to highlight what a typical kind of a workflow is, at least for me. You will spend probably 80% of your time satisfying dependencies within an application. And so in this case, it's looking for pipe. Well, pipe on what? Well, let's go into our code and let's check this out. So if we go into our app component, oh, that's right. I thought we were only using authService.logout, but we're also referencing is authenticated, which is an observable stream. So I've mocked out the auth service, but I haven't done it enough. I missed a piece. And so this is where, for me, typically what I'll do is I'll mock out the bare minimum, and then I'll just add in the pieces that I need. So you only have to mock out the pieces that your component under test is using. So in this case, if I go back to my spec, I need to update my mock auth service to have an is authenticated, let me spell that right, property that is going to have an observable stream. Well, how you can handle that is by using the of operator from RxJS, and I'm just going to send in true. We'll save this, and let's go back into our code, and you can see here that it did indeed pass. So just to review, we have created an object that represents just the pieces of the auth service that we were using inside of our app component. This is what we happen to be testing. And so we have a logout property that's a no-op. We have is authenticated, which is just an observable stream with true. And then from here, we are overriding the provider by saying provide auth service, use value mock auth service, and then using testbed.inject, we're able to get a reference to the auth service, which in this case is actually the underlying is the mock auth service, the actual instance itself. And then from here, we are calling spy on, and we're spying on the logout service. And when we call component.logout, what we want to assert is that we have called, or that service.logout has been called. And so this is really important that when you're testing a method that calls another method, using spies, that it's really, really easy to verify the delegation. So if I were going to even test a, let's say, a HTTP service, so I'll pull this up real quick just as a parting thought exercise. And if we look in shared and I go to my courses service, the question here is, how would we test this? Well, if I called create course, two things are happening. It's calling the notification service and it's calling HTTP post. And so what I would do is I'd verify that notification service.notify was called. And in this case, I could verify that http.post was called with a mock course. And so I'm not validating any of the results, but what I am doing is using spies. I am validating that it was properly delegated. And so this is how you can use or test a component with dependencies, and then from there spy on that mocked out dependency to make sure that it has done exactly what it advertised to do, that delegation was handled properly.